Tatsache ist, obwohl Peres jetzt eine ungeheure Popularität hat, 74% diesen Film Süddeutschland nie gegeben hat, nur seine eigene Partei hat nur 42% jetzt bei den Wählerumfragen, bei den Meinungsumfragen und setzt zusammen mit den anderen Linksparteien kommt da auch nur auf.
La séance est ouverte. Le procès-verbal de la dernière séance a été distribué. Y a-t-il des observations? Ce procès-verbal est adopté. Les noms des suppléants siégeant à la présente séance qui ont été portés à la connaissance de la présidence seront publiés dans la liste de présence annexée au procès-verbal et au compte-rendu des débats. L'ordre du jour appelle l'exposé de M. Shimon Peres, Premier ministre d'Israël. Monsieur le Premier ministre, Shalom. Avec tous mes collègues de cette Assemblée, je me félicite tout particulièrement, dans ce moment d'extrême tension en Méditerranée, de pouvoir vous accueillir dans cet hémicycle. Ce n'est pas la première fois qu'un ministre d'Israël nous fait l'amitié de venir s'entretenir avec nous. Votre illustre prédécesseur, Madame Golda Meir, et je m'en souviens très bien, était ici le premier jour d'un octobre 1973 qui a été particulièrement dramatique. D'abord pour votre pays, mais aussi par ses conséquences pour l'Europe et le monde. Depuis lors, le maréchal Sadat et le général d'aviation Moubarak, qui avaient lancé l'attaque surprise à travers le canal de Suez, ont fait la paix avec Israël. Paix froide peut-être, mais qui n'est plus mise en question aujourd'hui. En janvier dernier, le président Hosni Moubarak a été le premier chef d'État arabe à prendre la parole devant nous et nous avons beaucoup apprécié son réalisme et sa modération. Nous aimerions, comme vous, que la paix fondée sur un ordre démocratique règne un jour dans votre région. Le Liban, entre autres pays, a été une démocratie. Il l'est toujours sur le papier. Et d'autres pays voisins éprouvent certainement en ce moment même au moins la tentation de la démocratie. Toutefois, l'esprit de tolérance et de dialogue que vous représentez, mais sans lesquels il n'y a pas de démocratie, ne peut survivre aux bombes et à la haine de certains, et certains ici s'interrogent sur le bien fondé de certaines actions. Vous en aurez des échos tout à l'heure. Vous êtes ici, Monsieur le Premier ministre, alors que l'Europe éprouve un sentiment de découragement face aux problèmes de la Méditerranée, que l'Occident, l'Afrique et le monde arabe seront bien obligés de se partager en paix, Mare Nostrum dans un sens nouveau, et pourquoi pas en amitié. Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous avez la parole.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I shall repeat myself to start with expressing my very best wishes to you, Mr. Young, upon your election to be the honored president of this very important assembly. You're known to us as a very experienced parliamentarian and a very good friend of our country, and it is with pleasure that I shall speak under your auspices and presidency. Then again, I would like to thank very much the Assembly for giving us the chance to express some of the views, some of the topics concerning our own region. May I say, Mr. President, that relations between Europe and the Middle East are charged with historical memories, cultural ties, and current interests. It is a long and varied legacy which has created an intensive and fascinating web of relations, not without emotions and punctuated by national interest, both immediate and long-term. Europe's relations with the Jewish people and consequently with the Jewish state are burdened by the cold, dark shadow of the Nazi Holocaust. Yet, on their historical horizons, we find the shining accomplishments of Jewish scholars and scientists, as well as the occasional ray of light of shelter accorded to Jewish people over a very long period of time. For us, Europe is paved with monuments of Jewish culture and strewn with gravestones of Jewish victims. This is not the place or the time to review the annals of these relations. But one thing is certain. Europe is as committed to peace in the Middle East as it is devoted to seeking peace for itself. I am convinced that Europe is aware of Israel's current sincere efforts to put an end to hostility and belligerency and to replace the threat of war with the hope of coexistence. And how could we do otherwise when in almost all of our homes there are victims of Holocaust or refugees of persecution? How could we do otherwise when we are a state forced to go to war 5 times in a short history and to pay with the lives of our best sons in order to triumph and exist, but without the most important victory, the victory that brings peace? Today's agenda, therefore, for all of us, is the prospects for peace in the Middle East. And before assessing these chances, we should review the obstacles on the road to peace. Ladies and gentlemen, just as we can divide the world economically into developed and developing countries, so it can be classified militarily into belligerent and post-belligerent states. Today's Middle East is economically in the development phase and militarily in the belligerent stage. This manifests itself in actual warfare, in arms race, and in terrorism. Civil war is raging in Lebanon, Sudan, and Yemen. Costly in lives, these upheavals also undermine the chances for economic progress. The bloodiest war this region has known, that being waged over the past 6 years between Iran and Iraq, is not only a military confrontation, but a religious one as well. It has devastated the economics of the two combatants and taken its toll on their neighbors as well. The combined effect of its military, social, and economic costs is threatening to undermine stability in the entire region. Concurrently, the region is witnessing disproportionate investment in arms. Over the past decade alone, more than $50 billion were spent on arms. While many go hungry, army barracks are bursting with sophisticated and expensive modern weapons. Belligerency is also manifested in the outbursts of terrorism, domestic and international. It represents a strategy of aggression that resorts to criminal methods. It ignores the distinction between armed men and innocent bystanders, between battlefront and civilian life. At times, its object is to exert a political pressure, at others, only to win headlines in the press. All too often, its aim is continued conflict and the perpetuation of a problem. Its perpetrators seek neither a partner to negotiations nor a solution. There is hardly a leader in the Middle East, whether on the municipal or national level, who is not subject to terrorist threats. Hence, their views, at least as openly expressed, are often distorted by fear. History has known bursts of religious and political extremism manifested in open warfare as well in terrorism. Their duration was largely determined by the apathy of the onlookers. Combating international terrorism should be immediate, comprehensive, constant, and consistent in its application. It must be cooperatively executed. Terrorism is uncompromising in its action. Thus, confronting it must be of an uncompromised nature. A firm commitment to such a policy by the free world, the main theater for their action, and surely by the European countries, can tame the patrons of terrorism and contain the problem. Coupled with all those difficulties, the Middle East is now faced with the added dramatic threat of economic deterioration. Falling oil prices caused the loss of billions and billions of dollars to the countries in the Middle East. In addition to this direct loss, others whose economic stability depends on the prosperity of the oil producers are affected by the consequences as well. Revenues in remittance sums of nationals working in the oil countries are falling. Direct assistance was sharply reduced. Import capacities was significantly lowered. And recently, tourism has declined as a result of terrorism. All these serve to aggravate economic hardship. Ladies and gentlemen, the overriding immediate challenge in the Middle East, therefore, is, in my judgment, the alleviation of this looming economic crisis. Its tremors can already be felt under the surface. What should be done under these dire circumstances? Lost income to oil producers is obviously a net gain to the consumers. Hence, the industrialized countries are expected to save an estimated $70 billion this year alone. Even a small portion of this unexpected savings, if channeled to an economic rehabilitation program for the region, could make a substantial contribution to peace and stability in the Middle East. The countries affected are faced with a high rate of birth and the limited natural resources. They face a difficult choice: to submit to the uncontrolled bitter forces or mobilize external support to meet their urgent needs. There is no hope for a stable peace in the Middle East without a stable economy in the most important countries there. Moreover, involvement in economic development may grow into support for a positive political process. Your assembly, your distinguished assembly, can assume a leadership position in the launching of an imaginative 10-year economic program, thus promoting stability and peace in the region. A development program can support two clusters of economic projects, national and regional. National projects can be tailored to elevate specific hardship in the recipient countries. The regional one may address regional opportunities. While such a program may provide a supportive infrastructure for peace, it would be ill-advised to attach political conditions to it. It should not be a substitute for political efforts, but a support for them. As for Israel, Mr. President, we have taken drastic measures on the road to economic recovery with promising results. We feel confident in our economic future, yet a plan of this nature can benefit countries or areas under real economic and immediate stress. One cannot overemphasize the importance, the timeliness of such a project. Political processes can be slowed down. Wars can be deterred. Starvation cannot be postponed. Its demanding phase is at your doorstep on a daily basis, and you cannot, nor should you, escape them. It is our hope that you will seriously consider this approach and help transform it into a promising reality for so many countries and so many people. Again, Mr. President, as we address regional problems, we do not neglect our own. To us, the most important challenge is the attainment of a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace with our Arab neighbors, and a solution for the Palestinian problem. Peace should rekindle hope for all people in the region. It is to resolve political differences by peaceful means, thus preventing bloodshed. It will realize the commitment enshrined in the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty of no more war. It will introduce coexistence, cooperation, and security for all. It will allow the Palestinian people to participate in determining their own future. We are not in the mood to permit obstacles to paint the air with helplessness. The climate needed is a climate of affirmative mood and deed. In pursuit of a peaceful atmosphere, we reject rhetorical escalation and polemics that feed conflict. We prefer a language of realistic optimism to the lexicon of pessimistic despair. We harbor no ill will toward another country, another people, or another religion. Differences are no cause for hostility. Shortly after the establishment of the National Unity Government in Israel, we decided unilaterally to withdraw from Lebanon, a country that cannot find peace for itself or offer peace to its neighbors. We undertook a risk, yet even present limited functional security involvement of Israel can be dispensed with once the Lebanese themselves prove capable of governing their country and controlling its borders. In the West Bank and Gaza, our policies are based on openness, on an air of rapprochement, and we are aimed to promote progress in all aspects of life. An independent educational system, which includes 5 universities, is supported and economic development is encouraged. We have stated that Israel law does not apply to the territories. We have changed the settlement policy. Easier and simpler interaction between Jordan and the Palestinian territories is being constantly facilitated. Municipal and possibly higher level management by residents of the territories is sought, and we stand ready to pursue a policy of devolution. Our present efforts are aimed at improving relations with Egypt and improving the prospects for direct peace negotiations with Jordan and the Palestinians. Egypt and us should join hands in transforming the peace treaty between us into a shining example. We wish to enhance and transform this bilateral experience into a regional reality. Thus, we labor to resolve remaining differences between us, as manifested by our willingness to accommodate the Egyptian insistence on submitting the Taba issue to arbitration. I sincerely hope that agreement is within reach in a short while. We believe that King Hussein is seeking peace. His attempt to reach an agreement with the PLO leadership has failed, yet the process itself is confined neither to an existing organization or to a refusing leadership. We repeat our appeal to the King. Let us meet and negotiate. No time is too short. No place is too far. No issue is too difficult, and no form is too early. The Palestinian people know that we respect their aspiration to a life of dignity and self-expression. The Palestinians' cause is harmed by the resort to terrorism rather than diplomacy, to sloganism and rejectionism rather than to a political dialogue. The road of violence is long and bloody, but worst of all, it leads nowhere. Threats and acts of terrorism will not win the day. We shall, as we have to, remain unyielding in protecting the lives of our people. However, should Palestinians who reject terrorism and violence take the helm and steer toward a political solution, they will find us just as determined and steadfast in our efforts to reach an honorable solution. They will find a nation equally courageous in peace as in war. Time wasted is wasted opportunities as well. We could have achieved with relatively ease yesterday is already difficult to attain today. The possibilities of today may become impossibilities tomorrow. We call upon our European friends to accept the inner logic that guides those presently seeking a resolution and to support progress along the road they pave. Offering solutions prior to negotiations will postpone the negotiations without solving the problem. The only framework that holds promise is direct negotiations between a Jordanian-Palestinian delegation on the one hand and an Israeli delegation on the other, if necessary, within an international context. The countries of the Middle East are thus confronted with four major challenges: overcoming religious and political extremism that breed belligerency, combating international terrorism, alleviating a severe economic crisis, and solving the Arab-Israeli conflict. Once we overcome these four challenges, we shall be able to bequeath to our own children and grandchildren the realization of prophecy. You shall not see the sword, neither shall you have famine, but I will give you a short peace in this place. Jeremiah 14. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in 2 days, our people will celebrate Passover, the feast of spring and freedom. It is blossom and liberty that we wish all of you as we wish our own neighbors. Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, je voudrais vous remercier.
The problem of terrorism, in my judgment, is not just the victims of it, the innocent people, but very much the leaders in the Middle East who are being terrorized and frightened. Wouldn't it be for terror? I do not see any difficulty in composing a delegation of Palestinian leaders with whom we can negotiate. And I hope this will be the case, because in private encounters, we meet, we talk sense, we see eye to eye, and the real problem, in my judgment, is to escape, particularly for them, the frightening threat of terrorism.
Merci. La parole est à Monsieur de Arrescoja, l'Espagne.
Gracias, señor presidente. Señor primer ministro, como español admirador de su pueblo, no puedo por menos de, antes de dirigirme a usted, expresarle mi satisfacción por el reciente establecimiento de relaciones con un país con el que los españoles tenemos tantos lazos históricos, religiosos, culturales, incluso de consanguinidad. Y dicho esto, señor Shimon Peres, pregunto, quizá el Estado de Israel es el que más conocimiento tiene, porque lo ha padecido en carne propia, de los ataques terroristas en los últimos años. Y en la creencia de muchos está que el Estado de Israel conoce mejor que nadie dónde están las bases, las motivaciones y la base del ataque a distintos países. ¿Cree que concretamente, desde Libia, se ha patrocinado o ayudado de alguna forma no solo a grupos terroristas que han operado contra Israel, sino a aquellos que operan normalmente en la península ibérica? Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. I also want to express our satisfaction with the establishment of diplomatic relations between Spain and Israel after an interruption of almost 500 years. There is still a great deal of Spanish culture in our veins, as I'm afraid there are some Jewish culture in your veins. And while we were separated diplomatically, we remain attached culturally. The cradle of the culture, of the common culture, will not easily be forgotten. Now, sir, I am afraid that Libya is not only active in the Iberian island or peninsula, it is active everywhere. Name the country and you will find a Libyan finger in the pie, from Chad to England, all over the places. And, well, Mr. Gaddafi said he will put the world to flame. I'm afraid this is a little bit of an exaggerated threat. There are limits to Libya as well. They tried their best until now, and now they will meet more limitations than ever before. And as I have said, I do believe that sooner or later, all free countries, because terrorism, as I have said, is acting basically in democratic countries, discovering weak links in the chain, will unite and try to stop international crime as they are trying to stop domestic one. Thank you, Mr. President.
La parole est à Monsieur Gessel.
Mr. President, further to the need to combat terrorism based from Libya, can I please ask the Prime Minister if he sees any effective option other than that taken by the United States or by that type of action taken by the United States? What other action could conceivably have been effective against the terrorism based in Libya? And what more can the governments of Council of Europe countries do to help in the fight against terrorism?
Well, thank you, Mr. Jessel. I would say that, if I'm not wrong, the United States suggested to start with an economic boycott against the Libyans. Libya has gained something like $8 billion out of oil. Most of it was spent to the expansion of terrorism. This year, the income of Libya will be cut in half, only $4 billion, and they will have to make a choice about the spending of that money. Now, surely economic measures against Libya can be of help until they will learn the lesson. I don't think that anybody is interested in hurting the Libyan people. It's stopping a Libyan policy. Then again, I believe that an international cooperation which will gather intelligence, will inform on time, will bring an end to the use of diplomatic immunity and mail to ship over arms, bombs. All this can be done, in my judgment, quite easily and rather immediately. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est à Monsieur Buty.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Premier ministre, je viens d'un pays, la Suisse, qui apprécie énormément les efforts du peuple d'Israël dans sa volonté d'indépendance et de paix, comme vous venez si bien de l'exprimer. Permettez-moi de vous poser une question qui sera un peu différente de celles qui vous ont été posées jusqu'à présent concernant le statut de Jérusalem. Ce statut a toujours intéressé, évidemment, au plus haut degré Israël, mais l'ensemble du monde. Or, étant donné l'importance qu'Israël et Jérusalem représentent, non seulement pour vous, mais pour l'ensemble de la chrétienté, de l'islam et de combien d'autres communautés, que pense le gouvernement actuel d'Israël d'un statut de caractère international pour cette cité qui appartient au patrimoine culturel, spirituel et religieux, non seulement d'Israël, mais du monde entier? Ne penseriez-vous pas que peut-être un geste dans ce sens serait apprécié à sa juste valeur dans l'ensemble du monde et comme un geste qui démontrerait votre attachement, vous venez de rappeler, à la paix? Et je suis sûr que de très nombreuses communautés par-delà le monde vous en seraient très reconnaissantes.
Well, one should look upon Jerusalem as a holy city to all religions and as a capital of the state of Israel. When it comes to Jerusalem, the religious capital of so many religions, it is open to all of them. Open access, immunity to their services and sermons. I'm not aware of any complaint, neither by the Christians or the Muslims.
La parole est à Monsieur Stoffelen, Pays-Bas.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to thank the Prime Minister for his really impressive, courageous, and most of all, encouraging statement. Mr. Prime Minister, you spoke about the settlement policy, but you did so briefly. Therefore, I would be happy to hear a further clarification, and for that reason, I want to put the following question. If I'm well informed, you stated in an interview with the French paper Le Monde on the 26th February 1986 that your government does not continue the settlement policy in the occupied territories carried out by the previous Israeli governments. For that reason, I don't understand why apparently your government did allow for the establishment of 6 new settlements in 1985. Perhaps could you give a clarification?
Well, as you may have heard, we have a national coalition of a very special character. I'm so glad to see that our French friends are now also experiencing what they call cohabitation. Not that I came here to recommend it, but obviously this was a compromise between the two parties. And just to be on the lighter side, Mr. President, may I say that in our judgment, the first cohabitation was really established in paradise when Adam and Eve discovered that none of them has an alternative. Eve couldn't find another man, and Adam couldn't find another lady. So they came to the conclusion that they are in a cohabitated paradise. Then there were some other experiences, I believe, of a different nature. Thank you.
La parole est à M. Carvalhas du Portugal.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Premier ministre, j'ai écouté avec toute attention votre intervention. Je voudrais vous poser 2 questions. Ce n'est pas une question de cohabitation. Le gouvernement travailliste pense-t-il poursuivre sa politique d'installation des colonies condamnée par l'opinion publique et par l'ONU, ou dans une évolution politique et pacifique, envisage-t-il quelque inflation dans l'esprit de la paix? Et comme vous avez parlé du peuple palestinien et de la paix, est-ce que vous acceptez, est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec le droit du peuple palestinien à une patrie? Merci, monsieur.
Well, I have said that the present government has changed its settlement policy, and new settlements should be a matter of agreement between the two major parties to the present government. I don't want to go into too many details, but there is obviously a difference between the two parties on where, how often, and how many settlements to implement on the West Bank and Gaza. The problem of self-determination would be a simple one if there would be one land and one people. But when you have two people, you must allow at least each side to have a part in determining the future of the land. The minute you decide that just one of the parties has the right of self-determination, you actually have decided over the future of the land. Then, with your permission, may I add that self-determination is an opportunity for a democratic country. But when you put a pistol of the head of somebody and you say, well, decide on your determination, it is a vain offer. It is not serious. I mean, to elect, to choose, to determine, you can do only in a free society. When a society is overshadowed by a foreign power, or when a society is overpowered by terror, the offer of self-determination may simply be a bitter joke. Thank you.
La parole est à M. Baumel, France. Non? Alors, M. De Klerk, Belgique. M. Elmquist, Danemark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, only the week before last, the Legal Affairs Committee of this Assembly visited your country. And as a chairman of that committee, I can assure you we had very interesting and relevant discussions with the Committee on Law and Constitution of the Knesset, with the Speaker of the Knesset, and with your Minister of Justice. We listened with care to frank criticism, I would say, of some European countries of paying only lip service to the fight against terrorism. Now, Mr. Prime Minister, I was asked a question by one of your compatriots how I would define the distinction between a freedom fighter and a terrorist. I would like to ask you, Mr. Prime Minister, would you define to us that distinction as you see it?
I do not believe that anybody who is ready to kill an innocent person, a child, a woman, an old man, just for the sake of creating a sensation or calling attention, under no circumstances, I would call him a freedom fighter. May I say that in the best of my judgment, a freedom fighter must remain a human being. After all, the respect for life should be as important as the respect for freedom. Who is the one to decide that freedom for itself permits him to kill another man or another person? And here we are dealing clearly with an organization which is indiscriminated in its killing, in its assassination, taking the lives of irrelevant, uninvolved, innocent people. I would never give a legal status to this sort of terrorism, may the explanation be whatever it is announced. Thank you, Mr. President.
Había sido formulada por escrito previamente a esta intervención. La pregunta se refería simplemente a cuáles son los planes de su gobierno para asegurar la paz y la seguridad en el Mediterráneo oriental. Sin embargo, después de su intervención primera y de las contestaciones que ha dado a las diversas preguntas, que han sido claras, han sido inteligentes, serenas y decididas y llenas de sugerencias muy positivas, yo creo que globalmente mi pregunta está contestada. Sin embargo, si el señor primer ministro tiene algo que añadir en razón a la responsabilidad inmediata que tiene su país en la paz y la seguridad del Mediterráneo oriental, con mucho gusto yo la escucharía, aunque insisto que por mi parte considero esta pregunta ya contestada. Muchas gracias.
Mr. Cao, you were kind enough. I don't reject your compliments. It's a rare opportunity to take them. And I hope that I was specific enough. And may I say that my basic emphasis is to pay attention to the economic problem. I think without it, we are going to face a very, very difficult time all over the places. That would be my main message. And I'm not talking about Israel necessarily. I'm talking about other Arab countries who are facing a rather dramatic economic challenge. And I think Europe should have a good look at it. Thank you.
La parole est à Monsieur Büchner, RFA.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a brilliant answer, you stressed the problems of a coalition government. So let me add a question concerning your party convention earlier in this month. In the political platform adopted by this convention, the Labour Party expressed its desire for a peaceful settlement of the Arab-Israeli conflict, amongst others, by the wish to enter into discussions with those Palestinians who recognize Israel and refute terrorism. In spite of your last remarks about the PLO, I would ask you, are you ready to negotiate with the PLO as well as an equal partner if it accepts these two conditions?
Well, I can hardly take your question because it may force me to give the wrong answers. You know, this very same question was asked time and again. What will happen if the PLO will change and change and change? The question remained a question, and the PLO did not change, and our answers were in vain. There is an Arab saying that by embracing a tiger, you don't make out of it a cat. Because otherwise, if you'll ask me if you'll embrace a tiger and it will become a cat, will you recognize it as a cat? Yes, but I wonder if it will happen. I consider it a highly theoretic possibility. And it is because of it that I have a reservation in answering your question. I do not believe that under the present leadership, the PLO is going to change.
La parole est à M. Van der Werf, Pays-Bas.
Mr. Prime Minister, some time ago in The Hague, you impressed the members of both houses the most by your openness, your modesty, and your balanced views. I'm impressed. My impression is that you're doing it again. I'm quite well aware of it. But I didn't want to ask about terrorism, but about the military balance in the Middle East. Is it true that Soviet influence and even investments are reaching new heights in Syria as well as in Libya? And what's the effect of these Russian investments and subsidies, notable of sophisticated military equipment and of special training by Russian officers, on the military balance in the Middle East, and in particular on the position of Israel? And what does that Russian influence, fostering unrest, mean for the chances of reaching a lasting peace in the Middle East at all? Thank you.
Well, a military balance is something that should be almost every year be updated, because the introduction of new generation of military technology, it is very costly, it is very sophisticated, and before it's being put to test, nobody can really foretell the results. So I think that in spite of all the modern equipment, the human factor remains the most important one. Its motivation, its readiness to sacrifice himself, its convictions, its organization, and so on. It is true that the Russians are now adding and introducing new technology to the Middle East, and I'm afraid they are going to face some problems. Very much, for example, was given to the new Russian ground-to-air missile, the SAM-5, which exists both in Libya and Syria. When I ask myself, was the effectiveness of this missile in Libya very brilliant, I wonder. I think it poses a problem before the Russians. When they are showing their technology, it may occasionally show that they do not have the upper hand in it. And that already happened several times in the Middle East. Now, I'm not so sure that the Russians are really looking for war. They are looking for advantages that they can gain out of the existing conflict. They want gains for themselves. I don't think they are particularly paying attention if it is a war or if it is peace. So if they would have a choice, may I say that I do believe the Russians would prefer peace upon war. I don't think that they are seeking wars for the sake of war. And all of us, I believe, as well as you, did have great hopes when Gorbachev came to power. all of us hoped that this will be a change not only in biological age, but also in political direction. Well, the change in age is obvious. Now we shall have to wait if it has an additional meaning in political terms. Hopefully it may. For the time being, it is in style, not in content. And we shall have to continue to watch very carefully the Russians' maneuvers in the Middle East. Thank you, sir.
La parole est à Monsieur Sager, Suisse.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Herr Ministerpräsident, Sie haben wiederholt und in ergreifenden Worten auf die 5 Kriege hingewiesen, welche die noch nicht 40-jährige Geschichte Ihres Landes charakterisieren. Ihr Volk fühlt sich bedroht von außen. Wir alle bewundern in höchstem Maße die Geschlossenheit Ihres Landes in der Verteidigungsbereitschaft. Stimmt es andererseits, und hier meine Frage, dass es bedeutende innerisraelische Konfrontationen, ja Polarisationen gibt und dass hier ein Kulturkampf vorliegt, der bedenkliche Folgen haben könnte? Darf ich um Ihre Meinungsäußerung zu dieser Lage in diesem Bereich bitten und auch noch die Frage beifügen, ob hier nicht ein Hindernis auf dem Weg zur Friedensfindung vorliegt? Vielen Dank.
Well, I think Israel wouldn't be a Jewish state if we wouldn't have arguments and conflicts. It is part of our Jewish character. We like to argue. We like to have different views. Historically, we consider ourselves a pluralistic people with a tendency to questions rather than to answers. So for us, it's not a new experience. A very famous Jewish author in the United States, Arthur Miller, once remarked that Judaism is made of so many variations that it is almost un-Jewish to marry one of them. And we keep our variations, and we are not ashamed of it. I do not believe that it has to do with peace. I believe that, I don't believe we have a Kulturkampf, as you have said, because the differences are not only between the religious and the non-religious parties. You will find the differences in each camp separately, among the religious people and among the non-religious people. Now, Israel is, in a way, an ingathering of so many exiles. You have people coming from 100 different lands, speaking 100 different languages. I mean it literally. And it takes time. I mean, to come back to your old homeland, to renew the biblical language. And by the way, Israel is the only country in the Middle East who has returned to its original language. In Egypt, they don't speak the Egyptian language, as in Greece, they even speak a modern Greek language. Or in Syria, they don't use the Assyrian language. We speak Hebrew, like our forefathers. And as one of our authors said, Israel is the country where children are teaching their mothers the mother tongue. It is really being introduced by a new generation. And we are trying to create one people, but not of one view. Hopefully, we shall remain as pluralistic as we used to be in our history, paying a price for it, but also bearing the fruits of it. Thank you.
La parole est à Monsieur Sarti, Italie.
Signor Primo Ministro, mi occorrerebbe più di un minuto per dirle la simpatia e l'ammirazione che io ho per lei e per il suo popolo, ma mi limito a domandarle se si è fatto già una opinione sulle risultati del vertice di ieri di Lussemburgo, da parte dei 12 paesi europei e se ritiene che i paesi mediterranei e in particolare l'Italia possano svolgere un ruolo per la pace e la sicurezza nel Medio Oriente.
Thank you very much. I surely took note of the decision of the foreign ministers of the 12 European countries. I welcome it because I believe they have selected an alternative. You cannot criticize one way without offering another. And I think it's a serious attempt in order to reduce the threat of violence and terrorism done by the Libyans. I do believe that Italy can play a very important role, both in halting violence in the Middle East and contributing toward peace. I met the Prime Minister of Italy, Mr. Craxi, just quite recently, and we talked in great details about a development economic plan for the Middle East. I found him extremely positive and willing to partake in this sort of a constructive initiative. I hope it will be continued. Thank you.
La parole est à Thorbjørn Osborne, Grande-Bretagne.
I would like to welcome Prime Minister Shimon Peres' plea for peace in the Middle East at this time. I asked Mrs. Golda Meir a question when she came here in 1973. It was about oil supplies for Israel. It was a few days before the Yom Kippur War. Oil has provided funds for terrorism since then. But as you have said, those funds have died, and you've talked about economic reconstruction. In the debates on the American invasion of Libya in my country, Edward Heath and others have emphasized the need to resolve the PLO problem. When I was in Lebanon in the early 1970s, I regretted the fact that the Palestinian people stayed in their camps and were not absorbed on the farms. On a more recent visit to Israel, the Science and Technology Committee of this Assembly was impressed by the new technologies in agriculture, and could not what Israel has achieved be extended to the whole of the Middle East, and then surely there will be adequate room for all people. But finally, I'd ask you to clarify and elaborate on recent answers to what European governments, whether through the Council of Europe or the EEC, can now take. You spoke favorably of contact with Jordan. The trouble is that contact with PLO has often implied disloyalty to the State of Israel. How in the future can this problem be overcome, even if the PLO is a tiger? And could we work towards this being on the summit agenda when President Reagan meets Mr. Gorbachev?
Well, you know, the Americans are joking about the Middle East. They say it's being divided into two sorts of countries, the oily countries and the holy countries. And some of them are even critical about Moses, who after wandering for 40 years in the Middle East found the only corner there which is void of oil and water, today Israel. But when one has a fresh look on that choice, maybe he was right, because the price of oil may drop suddenly. The value of holiness can remain for a very long time at an unchanged level. And surely we do not depend upon oil, we depend upon our efforts, our talents, and we shall gladly share with our neighbors and others whatever we can offer in a positive manner, in studying, in technological development.
Notre Assemblée. Et j'espère que vous partirez avec la conviction qu'ici vous avez beaucoup d'amis, non seulement intéressés par les problèmes qui vous ont été posés, mais qui formulent également le vœu que pour vous-même, pour votre gouvernement et pour votre peuple, vous partez avec la mission de cette paix que vous souhaitons à tous, et que vous sachiez que le Conseil de l'Europe, cette Assemblée, est avec vous dans toutes vos préoccupations. Merci.
Président, je vous remercie infiniment.
Mes chers Mes chers collègues, je propose à l'Assemblée de tenir sa prochaine séance publique cet après-midi à 15 heures, avec l'ordre du jour suivant. Premièrement, décision de l'Assemblée sur la demande